Hey guys, welcome back to this new series called by Testing Bad, where we start testing a Spring Boot application from worst to a better approach. In this episode, we will be testing a Spring Batch application. So, in order to give you a context about the application that we are going to test, I would like to suggest you guys to go to the previous video related to Spring Batch application. Okay, so we were talking about multi-step, okay, conditional flow. So how is the application that we are going to test? Okay, so our application is a simple Spring Batch application, okay, the Spring Batch and Spring integration. So we call it by Spring Batch integration application, okay, but it's a Spring Batch application. So the application has an item reader, so it reads a file, okay, and persists the records into database, okay. But our application have here a particular aspect, okay, that I want to tell you guys. So for example, when we process a file successfully, we move the file that we just processed into a directory. So this directory is called by processed directory. In other hand, when we process the file, but let's suppose that we read the file and some lines were with errors or something like that, so we skip some lines. In that case, in the end of the job, we send the processed file into a completed with skips directory. I think that in better use case will be, for example, to send only the number of the lines, okay, that we skip. So, but let's leave it to another video. So, in other hand, okay, else, we have here a new directory called by failed directory. So, when we could not, for example, process a file, when we have a job that the exit status is failed, okay, so we send the file, okay, to this directory called by failed directory. So in this video, we are going to do an end-to-end testing, okay? We are skipping the unit testing because, as you can understand, this series is called by Testing Bad. So we are going to do end-to-end testing. But before, let's go and let's take a look of our Spring Batch application. So this is our job configuration. You can find this application from the description of this video. There is a link to the GitHub, okay, repository, where you can just download it and start following what we are going to do here. So this is our application. As you can see, there is that conditional flow and so on, okay. But the first thing that we are going to talk about testing bad is the approach that we use, okay, in order to create the Spring Batch application. It's working, okay, it's production ready, okay, code. But if you take a deep look here, you can see that most of our components, okay, have been created here in the same class. Okay, so for example, if we want to test the item reader, okay, the flat file item reader, of course we can test it, but sometimes testing in isolation is hard because we are just creating all our beans, all our components in the same class, right? So let's take a look here what we did for this item processor. So this item processor is clean, right? So we have created a new class where we implement, okay, the interface, the item processor from Spring Batch, and we create our bean, our item processor. This is amazing. This is the best way that we can just, for example, create our components. And as you can see, we have here, it's a component, and we are using it. Let's take a look. We are using it here, right, in our step. So we have here this item processor, right? So why we could not, for example, follow the same approach for item reader, item writer, and so on? So this is the first thing that we have to keep in mind. Maybe in the next videos, I will show you the best practices to create all your components, okay? Reader, processor and writer in a different class, okay? Or maybe you can just, for example, try to see, because it will allow us to unit testing or better, testing in isolation, okay? So for now, everything is okay, okay? We can just, for example, assume that it's okay. I'm telling you guys, most of tutorial, you will see people are creating Spring Batch this way, even in the documentation, okay? But I can just tell you guys that sometimes it's not so good, okay, to create all our components for our job, okay, in the same class. But for now, let's move to our end-to-end test, okay? And later we will talk a little bit more about unit testing. So guys, as always, the first thing that we need to do is to create our test class. So in that order, I will not, for example, test all these methods because we are doing the end-to-end test, not unit testing. So in that order, let me just create our class, and we are going to use the setup, okay, where we do our setups, and after, okay. So let's create the class. So most of the time, in order to do end-to-end testing of Spring Batch, you will need most of the case two annotations, okay. The first one is a Spring JUnit config, okay, and you can read a little bit more about this annotation, and also the Spring Batch test annotation. This is the two annotation that in most of your end-to-end testing you will use. So in that order, I think the first thing that we need to do is by adding, okay, the Spring Batch test annotation as well as the Spring JUnit config, okay? So in this configuration class, we will add some classes of our configuration. We need the sales info, our main application, because we have the enable batch processing here, okay? If we had it here, let's suppose in our job config, I think we will not need that, okay? So in our case, as we have in this main class our enable batch processing, which is the application that tell the Spring framework that it's a Spring Batch application, okay? We will need to include this our main, okay, application in our JUnit config, okay? And also we need our sales info job config. So in that order, let me just, for example, add here the sales info job config, okay, class. So having that, I think we can now start thinking about our test data, okay? So I'm going to show you guys what we had before. So before we had a directory, which is our input directory, where we had, okay, our files to process. So the Spring application is looking at this directory. So in my particular opinion, okay, we, for example, could just here in our tests, okay, we could, for example, create a new directory, resource, okay, we could create resource. And then we could, for example, create the same, let's suppose the sales info directory, okay? And then let's suppose we could create our test data. Let's suppose here sales, okay, that's CSV, because we are processing CSV. And then we can have our lines. But let's suppose that we are following our use case where we process and then we move to some directories. What will happen here? So if we process the first time, we move to a complete directory, and we could, of course, we could do it. What I'm trying to tell you guys is that, for example, we read, okay, this file, this sales file. If success, we will move to another directory. So can you think that, I know that this is the resources, okay, for test, it's in test package, but in my particular use case, I don't like to put it here, okay, because I think the test data should be created only when our tests are executing, okay, during the execution of our test. So this is my particular opinion, okay, so instead of doing it like this, No, I don't want to do it like this. What I'm going to do is to think a way that I can, for example, let me say like, okay, when I start my tests, okay, I create all those directory, and when my tests end, okay, I delete the directory. And I don't want to package, okay, all those test data, for example, files to process, okay, with my jar, okay. So in that order, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the target, okay, directory as our input directory for our test. Just as well that we are having it here, of course it's hard-coded in real case scenario. You will need to, for example, to get file from a SFTP server or some remote server or something like that, okay. But for this particular example, okay, it's very nice, okay, nothing bad here. But for our test, we will create our test data, okay, in the target, because when we do, for example, Maven clean, we can just, for example, clean, okay, the test data and so on. So in that order, let's start creating our setup, okay. So before creating setup, I would like to specify, okay, as we can see here. Let's take a look once again, okay. I would like to specify the input directory. So in that order, let me just create here, okay. So we are going to create this as a path, and let's call it by input directory. So the directory, okay, will be path of, okay, I'm using the path of, I think this is the Java 8 or Java 11, I think it's, yeah, Java 11, okay. And I want to tell Spring, okay, my input directory will be the target, okay, the target, and I will say, okay, target that sales info, okay, just in order to inside of target, okay, to have our let's say like input directory here. And yes, so everything is okay, okay, as we have the input directory. Now the next thing that we need to do is by creating our process, our complete with skip and our fail directory, just the same way that we have here, okay, in our in our real case scenario, okay. We will create also the 3 directories. So guys, as you can see, we have here all our directories, okay? So we have the expected completed directory, okay? We have the fail, okay? And complete with skip, which actually I think it's not true, because as we can, if we take a look here in our job, let me show you guys, okay? When we complete with skips, okay, we just send an email, okay? So we will test also this use case. So having our, let's say like expected, okay, scenarios, okay, we can start doing the end-to-end test. Of course that you always should apply for, let's suppose, the test-driven development. But for this case, okay, let me just keep doing what we are doing. So the first thing that we need to do in our setup, okay, we want to create before each, okay, execution, we want to create our input directory. So here in target, we will create our input directory. So in that order, let me just, for example, do like this. So we are going to see if file not exists, okay. Let's put here the input directory, okay. So if the file does not exist, so we are going to create, okay, the directory. So now we need to add the sneaky throw, Okay, we add the sneaky throws. It's good for the checked exceptions. So before running our test, we want to create the input directory, right? We want to set up our directory. So now, very important part here. So when we are testing a Spring Batch application, we need two utility classes. The first one is job launcher test utils. So let's just, for example, use it here, okay? Okay, and we need to inject it, okay, the job launcher test util, and the next one is the job repository test util. So let's use it. And let's also inject it, okay? So why we need these two classes, okay? The first thing that we are going to do, we are going to use the job repository test util. So for example, before running, okay, our tests, okay, because we will have a lot of tests here, okay, many tests here. So before running, I want to remove, okay, I want to remove all executions, okay? So it will allow me to, for example, for every particular test, make it more clear. You want to understand what is job repository test util. So this will be for, if you remember in the previous video, I think the second or the first video, okay, this is just the job repository, but for the test, okay, it's a utility class for our tests. So this is what we have here. And for the setup, everything is okay. And now I think we need to create also some configuration for the cleanup, okay? So in the setup, we are going to create our input, right, directory, where we will have our files to process in our tests. But after, okay, every single test, what I want to do, I think maybe after all, but I want just to make it simple, okay? We will clean our input directory, because if you remember, guys, we have here the input directory, which is sales info. Let's suppose that we process well, okay? We will expect that a new directory will be created here. So in that order, let's just, for example, create here a mechanism that will allow us to, for each test, okay, we will delete, let's suppose, the files that we will have here in order to allow the new test, okay, to test with the same configuration. So in that order, let me just create, let's suppose, okay, I'm going to use the files, okay, walk, which is a very nice method, okay, in order to traverse a directory and compute some operation there, okay. So it will return a file tree, okay. And what we are going to do is we are going to let me just put it like this, file tree, okay. So we are going to filter that all files, okay, only the files, and we are going to delete it, okay. So in that order, I'm just going to use to file, okay, and for each file, okay, we are going to use the file delete, okay. We are going to delete the file. So it's complaining because we need also to handle the exception, but for our case, we are going to use once again the long box sneaky throws, okay, and I think it's okay. Yes, so it's complaining also because we need to use the try with resources, okay. If you remember, guys, it's Java basic, okay. We need to do it like this, okay. So let me just do it like this, refactoring, okay. Yes, this is the way that we do with try with resource. And we can, for example, log here, okay. Let's just log here. Let's suppose I'm just going to use here the cell4j annotation, which is the lombok one that will allow me to log, okay, the file that we are deleting here. So file to delete, okay, and let's just call the log, okay. Maybe it's not info, but let's just put it like warning, okay. So deleting file at get name. So okay, it's not a terminal operation. Yes, that's why it's like this. I don't know if it's a good thing to log, okay, in your test, but let me think about it later, okay. So this is what we have here, okay. Before our test, we are going to create directory if it does not exist, okay, and also we are going to remove the previous job executions. And after the test, we are going to do a cleanup where we are just going to go to our input directory, because every single test will need the input directory clean, okay, empty, because we will set up them differently, and we will delete the files that we have in the input directory. So this is our setup. Now I think this is the time to write our first test case. Let's once again go back here. So the first test case will be should read from, let's suppose, directory and persist the records into database and move the file to the process directory. In that order, let's just create here the first method. So I think this is what we have here, but before doing that, I think we can, for example, give here the given when then approach, okay, because this name should read from file and persist into database and move to process directory is not it's not following the best approaches, okay. Of course, it's you can understand because I'm using what the real name, okay. I'm expressing the intention here, but we could, for example, use the given when then. So in that order, let me just write it here. So guys, coming back here, as we can see now, I'm using display name. Of course, we should annotate it as a test, okay, in order to be our test. So I'm using display name in order to give some more detailed, okay, some more detailed information about our test, as we can see here. So given a directory with valid files, when job launched, then records should be persisted into database and the input file is moved to process directory, okay. So you should think always in order to make everything clear. So express your intention. Don't try to abbreviate. Don't try to hide something that you are doing, okay. It's very nice for maintenance of the test, okay. So in that order, let's keep doing our job here. So the first thing that we are going to do now is let me say we need the file to process, right? We need the file to process. As I was telling you guys that I don't want to put the files here or somewhere else. I will create the files, okay, I will create the test data on demand. I will create the test data only when I'm running the test, okay? It's not the silver bullet, okay, but for me, it's a good way to keep our tests isolated from other part of our application. Of course, some people, they decide to put the test data here in resources. Now I'm just going to create, okay, the test data, okay, and I will create it, okay, in my input directory. So in that order, I'm just going to create here a new path, okay. I'm using the path of, so I'm going to give the input directory, okay, and I want to use the file separator. It's nice. File separator is nice instead of, for example, when I was junior, I will just, for example, put here the separator here. So it's not OS, okay, operation system agnostic, okay, because some operation system, they understand it like this, and some, for example, like this, Windows, Mac, or Linux. So you should always use something that is more system agnostic, okay? So in that order, I'm just going to use the file separator. It's from Java, okay? And take a look, if you don't know it, okay? Take a look about the file separator. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create, because as you can see, we are creating. Of course, it's not, I don't like this kind of, I don't like the intelligent approach. I want the clean one. So I'm going to give the name of the file, okay? So I'm just going to give the name of file like this, okay? Let me just say, okay, should complete. Yes, so this is, if you understand, guys, I'm just concatenating, I'm using our target, okay, our directory, okay, and I'm creating, okay, I'm just going to, this is the path, so it will be target, sales info, and then sales info test should complete that CSV, because this is the file, okay, and what I'm doing here is just creating, okay, the file, okay. So I just create the file. Of course, it's also throwing an exception. Let's use once again the sneaky throws here, okay. And so let's put it in order, because the sneaky throws is not the first thing that we have, okay. It should be later, okay, because the first thing is test, then other annotations. So this is what we have here. So we create the file, so it will be input file. Now we create our file, we have the file, and now we need the data to process, right? So I'm just going to my computer, okay, and I'm going to copy and paste here the file. So this is the file. You can find the file in the GitHub, okay, project related to this batch application. But actually our file, okay, this is our file. We have the header, the product, the seller, and so on, okay. I just have here let's say like 4 lines, okay. And of course, I'm not going to use it, okay. So what I'm going to do, I think, now that I have the file, I need the data, okay? So I have the file and I have the data. I want to write this data into this file. People can say like, okay, but it's so hard, you are messing up. No, I'm just trying to make my tests, okay, more clean. So in that order, I'm just going to create here a new class, let's say like sales info test data provider, okay. And I'm going to say like, okay, it's an utility class, okay, provider utils. So it's an utility class. So in that order, let me use the utility class from Lombok also. If you understand the best practices of creating an utility class, you will understand why I put here the annotation utility, okay? Think about helpers and utility class are the same, and there are some good and best practices to follow in order to create an utility class. So what I'm going to do here in this utility class, I'm just going to, this utility class, okay, will provide for me, for example, the lines, okay, the content, okay. So I'm just going to say, okay, supply valid content, okay. Of course, we could just, for example, make it differently. So I'm just going to return. So guys, if you are using Java 17, you understand that now we have the test blocks with Java, okay. So I'm just going to copy this content here, okay, and I'm going to write it as a Java string, okay. String test blocks is the ability, okay, to write the block of test as a string, okay, and you just need to give the three, okay, quotes. So, and I'm just paste it here, okay, and that's it. So this is the test block. And now what I'm going to do here in our test class, I'm just going to say, okay, now that I have the content, okay, I'm just going to use the files. Files is from Java, I think 8 and some improvement, Java 11 and so on. And I'm going to say, okay, now write string, okay. So writing string, so what is here? Okay, yeah, we are going to use the path, okay, the input file, okay, and then we are going to use our sales info test data provider utils, okay, in order to supply the content, okay. So in that order we have here, let me just format it, okay, in that order we have here, we are writing this input file, okay, we'll have this content here, okay. So I think now that we have our input file, okay, the next thing that we need to do, so we can call it by given, okay, this is the, if you understand, okay, if you follow the given when then in JUnit, okay, you will understand it. So now we are going to do the when. So given a valid file, okay, with content, okay, when we launch our Spring Batch application. So how we launch our Spring Batch application, okay, before launching our Spring Batch application, we know, okay, we know that we use the job parameters, okay. So we are we are not reading the file. Let me just delete this, okay, we don't need it. So if you remember, guys, we are using the Spring Batch integration, okay, in order to pull, okay, from a directory. Even if you are not using, obviously you will use the job parameter, okay. So now let's create our job parameters. So parameter builder, okay. Now the first thing that we are going to do is to add a string. So if you go here in our reader, okay, we know that we are reading, okay, from this param. We need this param here, okay. So we are going to set, okay, this param, okay, and of course, okay, we need to specify, okay, the file itself. So we are going to what we are doing here is that we are telling, okay, job parameter, okay, the input file name will be this file, okay, this file here that we created, okay, sales info test should complete.csv, okay, this file has content, okay, because we just write the content here, okay. And yes, the next thing that we need to do maybe is to add date, okay. I'm just going to explain you uniqueness will be new date, okay. And yes, to job parameter, okay. So this is our job parameter. I think we could, for example, put it here in when, because it's better to be here. So why I put here uniqueness? Actually, if we don't need it, okay, but if you are curious about this, you can understand it when we created somewhere in our tutorials the file message to job request, okay. So we add this the uniqueness in order just to make our job like run, okay, always with the same input. So for example, if we process the same file, okay, it's the same file, but we add another param uniqueness, which is new date, always will be different, okay. So it's not important, guys, don't pay attention to it, okay. So now that we have, okay, the job parameter, This is where the job, okay, the job launcher test utils come into action. Okay, this is what we need to do. So remember, always when we are testing a Spring Batch application, we need the job launcher, okay, in order to launch our test, okay, our job as a test. So let's use the job launcher, okay, that launch, okay, a job